The Blackwater was a colossal cargo ship that cut through the Atlantic like a shadow. It was old, massive, and mysterious, once hailed as the pride of the fleet. But after years of disrepair and multiple changes in ownership, the Blackwater was mostly forgotten, taking only smaller and more obscure jobs, well out of the sight of major ports. The crew, 12 men strong, was as seasoned as they came, hardened by years on rough seas. This voyage was supposed to be routine, transporting old machinery and scrap metal from the Canary Islands to Newfoundland. Simple enough. No one thought twice about the job, but then again, no one knew the ship's history. Captain Harris, a grizzled seafarer with deep lines etched into his face, stood on the bridge. He stared at the fog that had settled over the water. The radar blinked steadily, showing nothing unusual, yet there was a heavy presence in the air. Something felt wrong. He couldn't quite explain it, but it had settled deep in his bones the moment they'd left port. "Everything all right, Cap?" asked Jonah, the first mate, a broad-shouldered man who had never been shaken by anything in his life. Captain Harris didn't respond right away. He just kept staring into the fog. "Keep an eye on the radar," he finally muttered, though his voice was distant, distracted. Jonah glanced at him, concerned, but said nothing more. As the hours passed, strange things began happening. It started small. Tools went missing only to reappear in the strangest of places, like the galley or in empty cabins. The crew blamed each other, brushing it off as exhaustion or simple forgetfulness. But soon, it escalated. Distant footsteps echoed in the halls, and muffled voices were heard beneath the floors. No matter how much the crew searched, they could never find the source of the sounds. Late one night, Adam, the ship's mechanic, swore he saw someone standing at the end of the engine room, just beyond the dim light. He thought it was one of the other men, but when he called out, the figure turned and disappeared into the dark. Adam rushed after it, but found nothing, only the cold, oily darkness of the ship's underbelly. "I saw someone," Adam insisted the next morning over breakfast. His face was pale and his eyes had dark circles under them. "They were standing right there, watching me." "Stop it," muttered Henry, the ship's cook. "You're gonna scare yourself silly." "I'm not joking, Henry. Something's off. I can feel it." "You just need some sleep," Jonah said, trying to soothe the growing tension. "We've all been working too hard." But as the voyage continued, the ship itself seemed to come alive. The once familiar creaks and groans of the ship grew louder, almost rhythmic, like a pulse beating from the heart of the vessel. The fog clung to the Blackwater like a shroud, and the crew could feel the weight of the air pressing down on them, as if something unseen was watching their every move. Then one night, the ship's alarm went off. The entire crew rushed to the deck, only to find nothing but more fog. They searched the ship from bow to stern, but the source of the alarm remained a mystery. The ship was too large, too old, with too many hidden corners. It could have been anything, or nothing at all. As the days dragged on, more of the crew began reporting sightings. A figure in a torn raincoat wandering the deck, always just out of reach. Shadows slipping in and out of sight, whispering voices behind closed doors. And then there were the nightmares, each crew member plagued by the same dream. They saw themselves trapped in the hull of the ship, the walls closing in on them as they screamed for help that would never come. Frankie, one of the deckhands, didn't show up for his shift. The crew searched the entire ship, calling his name, but there was no sign of him. His bunk was untouched, and no one had seen him leave. They found his boots, still wet from the deck, placed neatly by his bed. By the end of that day, panic began to take hold. Some of the men suggested turning the ship around, but Captain Harris refused. He was a stubborn man, and he wouldn't be deterred by what he called sailor superstitions. They were close to their destination, just a few more days. But no one could shake the growing dread that had settled over the Blackwater like a curse. The next night, another man vanished. This time it was Davis, the ship's navigator. His disappearance was even more unsettling. His charts and compass were left scattered across his desk, as though he had been in the middle of something before simply vanishing into thin air. Terror had taken hold of the crew. The men refused to sleep alone, huddling together in the mess hall, eyes wide and hands gripping whatever weapons they could find. They whispered about the stories they'd heard, the old tales of ships that never returned, ships haunted by the ghosts of long-dead sailors. The Blackwater had a dark past, and now it seemed like that past was clawing its way back to the surface. Jonah found an old logbook buried deep in the captain's quarters. It was from decades ago, detailing strange disappearances of the crew during a similar voyage. The entries became increasingly frantic, and the final entry was little more than a scribble. "It wants us. It needs us. We are never leaving." "Captain, we have to turn around," Jonah demanded, his voice tight with fear as he showed the logbook to Harris. "This ship, it's cursed." But the captain's eyes were glazed over and his skin was pale. It was as if he had already surrendered to whatever evil stalked the Blackwater. "We'll reach port soon enough," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Just keep moving forward." That night, a storm hit. Waves crashed against the Blackwater, and the ship groaned as though it was alive. The men fought against the storm, but the sea was unforgiving. In the chaos, more crew members went missing, snatched away by unseen hands. The ship's power flickered and died, plunging the Blackwater into darkness. Jonah and the few remaining men scrambled through the ship, trying to find safety. But no matter where they went, the ship twisted around them like a maze. Hallways that should have led to the engine room now looped back on themselves. Doors that had once been open were now sealed shut. The ship was alive, and it was toying with them. In a final, desperate attempt to escape, Jonah broke into the captain's quarters. He found Captain Harris standing by the window, staring into the fog with a blank expression. "It's over, Captain," Jonah shouted. "We have to abandon ship." But the captain didn't move. "There's no leaving," he whispered, his voice hollow. "Not for us." Then, slowly, the captain turned to face Jonah. His eyes were black, empty voids that swallowed the dim light of the room. Behind him, a figure appeared, dressed in the same torn raincoat that the crew had seen roaming the ship. It stepped forward, revealing its face, pale, twisted, and grotesque, as though it had been rotting for years at the bottom of the sea. Jonah backed away in horror as the figure reached out a decayed hand. "You're one of us now," it rasped, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. And in that moment, Jonah realized the terrible truth. The Blackwater wasn't just haunted, it was a trap, a living thing that consumed souls and kept them within its cursed hull. The crew hadn't disappeared, they had become part of the ship, trapped for eternity. The fog thickened around the Blackwater, and the screams of the last remaining men were swallowed by the night. The ship continued its voyage across the endless sea, empty once again. And deep in the heart of the ship, the Blackwater pulsed with a sinister life, as if the ship itself were a living, breathing entity. Its rusted, corroded metal walls thrummed with an unnatural rhythm, like the steady beat of a dark heart hidden within its bowels. The air was thick with malevolent energy, the once familiar groans and creaks of the ship, now an eerie cadence, as though whispering dark secrets of the souls it had claimed over the decades. But deep within, the haunted ship waited with an unnatural patience, its pulse slow but steady, like the lull before a storm. It knew it would not remain idle for long. In time, another crew would come, drawn by fate or greed, unaware of the darkness that lay beneath the surface of the Blackwater.